field, two brothers, a sacrifice, and the first murder in history. Cain and Abel, humanity's first brothers, and the first blood spilled between them. But what if that day had been different? What if Cain had swallowed his anger and dropped the stone? What if humanity had never known war? Wait, take a deep breath. Because what I'm about to say is something you won't expect. Maybe if there had been no war, the world would be worse. Yes, you heard that right. The history books teach us that war is terrible, and they're right. But no one asked the real question. If there were no war, what would have taken its place? Tonight, we're going to explore history's most unsettling question together. And the answer you find will make you rethink everything. Göbekli Tepe. In Turkey, built 12,000 years ago, the oldest temple in the world. There are no defensive walls here, no remains of weapons. This means that at the dawn of human history, there was no war. People erected massive stone pillars, carved complex symbols, but built nothing to protect themselves from one another. So what changed? Agriculture. Around 10,000 BC, humanity discovered farming in the Fertile Crescent. And from that moment, everything began to change. People started living in one place, storing surplus crops, and for the first time, the concept of ownership appeared. Jericho, the world's oldest known walled city, was built 9,000 years ago. Why walls? Because there was now something to protect. According to anthropologist James C. Scott, agriculture brought disaster to humanity. It created inequality. Inequality led to hierarchy, and hierarchy became the foundation of war. But saying, if only agriculture had developed differently, everything would be fine, is too simple. Agriculture didn't just bring ownership, it also brought a population explosion. A hunter-gatherer woman had about 4 to 5 children in her lifetime, while a farming woman could have 8 to 10. Settled life and a stable food supply made this possible. Now think about it. If there had never been war, how would this population boom have been controlled? In 1798, Thomas Malthus wrote the basic law of demography. Population grows geometrically, but resources grow arithmetically. The result is inevitable: famine. So, if war had never existed, people might not have died on battlefields, but they would have died of hunger. The Irish potato famine is a perfect example. Between 1845 and 1852, there was no war, yet 1 million people died of starvation. These deaths weren't sudden, they lasted for days, weeks, months. First the children, then the elderly, then everyone. Instead of the instant violence of war, came the slow torture of hunger. Which one is more humane? That's hard to say. Around 3,500 BC, the first city-states began to rise in Mesopotamia: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu. The earliest written records date from this period, and interestingly, many of them describe war. The Victory Stele of King Eannatum tells the story of a great battle between Lagash and Umma. The two city-states fought over water sources, and thousands of soldiers died. History books present this as a tragedy, and they're right. But few people ever ask the deeper question: what if that war had never happened? Because war didn't only bring destruction, it also brought organization. The first professional bureaucrats, the first structured tax systems, the first written laws, all emerged from the administrative demands that war created. Historian Charles Tilly famously said, "War made the state, and the state made war." If the Sumerian cities had lived in peace, they would have had no need for a strong central authority. Each family would tend its own field, manage its own affairs, and there would be no reason for complex coordination. And without organization, no great temples could be built, no vast irrigation systems developed, no advanced technology born. So the majestic ziggurats, the monumental temples, the intricate canal networks, all of these were, in a sense, byproducts of war. Of course, the price was terrible. Thousands of soldiers killed, families shattered, cities burned. But if that price had never been paid, would civilization itself have been born? Maybe, but much more slowly, perhaps so slowly, that we might still be living in the Stone Age today. Around 3100 BC, Egypt was unified, and soon after began the construction of some of the most magnificent structures in history: the pyramids. It's estimated that 100,000 workers labored for 20 years to build the Great Pyramid. Archaeological evidence shows that these workers were poorly fed, suffered from serious health problems, and lived short lives, around 30 to 35 years on average. History books celebrate the pyramids as one of humanity's greatest achievements, but they rarely emphasize how many lives were lost to create them. For Egypt to build such monuments, it had to wage constant wars of expansion, invading Nubia, seizing Sinai, and controlling Palestine. Every conquest brought more slaves, more gold, more resources. But to see the pyramids only as monuments to suffering and forced labor would be incomplete, because building them required geometry. Geometry advanced mathematics. Mathematics led to astronomy. Astronomy led to the calendar. The calendar revolutionized agriculture. So yes, the pyramids cost thousands of lives, but they also laid the foundations of science itself. Modern morality tells us that human life is above all else, and that's absolutely true. But history shows a harsher truth. Progress demands a price. If Egypt hadn't fought wars, hadn't conquered, hadn't accumulated resources for massive projects, the pyramids would never have been built. And without the pyramids, geometry might never have evolved so quickly. Without geometry, the rise of mathematics and modern science would have been delayed. So which would you choose? The lives of those workers, or thousands of years of scientific progress? It's a question with no easy answer. Over the 500 years of the Roman Empire, an estimated 50 million people died in wars, a horrifying number. Carthage was wiped off the map, millions were massacred in Gaul, the Jewish revolts were crushed with brutality, and Jerusalem was burned to the ground. But Rome did not only conquer, it also built. Thousands of kilometers of roads, hundreds of aqueducts, countless ports, and intricate sewage systems, the infrastructure Rome created became the foundation of modern Europe. Some of these structures are still functioning today, more than 2,000 years later. How was all this infrastructure funded? Through conquest. Rome's economic engine worked like this. A city was conquered, its treasures were looted, taxes were collected, and those resources financed the construction of roads, bridges, and aqueducts. That infrastructure boosted trade. Trade created wealth, and wealth funded more soldiers and more conquests, a never-ending cycle. What if Rome had chosen trade instead of war? According to historian Niall Ferguson, Rome could never have become a great power that way, because trade generates wealth far more slowly than war. And perhaps that would have been morally better. But without war, there would have been no Rome as we know it. The road systems we drive on, the principles of city planning, even the foundations of our legal systems, all were built with the spoils of Roman conquest. So which matters more? The 50 million lives lost, or the infrastructure that benefited billions for millennia? Modern morality would choose the first, and it would be right to do so. But history chose the second, and we are still living with its consequences today. In the 11th century, Pope Urban II declared the Crusades, igniting 2 centuries of bloodshed. During the First Crusade, when the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, they massacred 70,000 people, Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians. According to the chronicler Fulcher of Chartres, the streets ran with blood up to the knees. Yet at the very same time, a completely different world existed in Al-Andalus. In Cordoba, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in peace. The city held a massive library of over 400,000 books. Philosophers from different faiths, Averroes, Maimonides, Avicenna, read each other's works, debated ideas, and pushed the boundaries of science and philosophy. The Crusades didn't only bring destruction. When the Crusaders reached the Middle East, they encountered the advanced scientific world of Islam. Hospitals, libraries, observatories, things Europe had never seen before. And when they returned, they brought that knowledge back with them. The works of Arab mathematicians, Greek philosophers, and medical scholars all reached Western Europe through the Crusades. Historian Thomas Asbridge argues that without the Crusades, the Renaissance might have been delayed by 200 years, because the Renaissance was, in essence, the rebirth of lost Greek and Arab science in Europe. Would this transfer of knowledge have happened without war? Perhaps, but much more slowly. 70,000 people died in the First Crusade, but scientific progress accelerated. So which side would you choose? The innocent lives lost, or the centuries of knowledge gained? The 20th century, 2 world wars and over 100 million dead. The Holocaust, atomic bombs, trenches, poison gas, the darkest pages of human history. And yet, nearly every fundamental technology of the modern world was born from those wars. Rocket technology evolved from Nazi Germany's V-2 missiles. Nuclear energy emerged from the Manhattan Project. The Internet was born from the U.S. Defense Department's ARPANET program. Jet engines were developed during World War II. Even penicillin and antibiotics were mass-produced for soldiers wounded in World War I. So what would have happened if those wars had never occurred? Technology would have advanced, but much more slowly. In peacetime, no government would ever devote such vast resources to science. The Manhattan Project alone cost the equivalent of $28 billion today. Under normal circumstances, that kind of funding would be unimaginable. War is the one force that drives nations to invest without limits. So yes, 100 million people died. But technology leapt 50 years ahead. Almost everything we use today, the internet, space travel, medical innovation, is a byproduct of war. It's horrifying, but it's true. Now let's come to the biggest what if of all. Throughout history, it's estimated that around 1 billion people have died in wars. But what if none of them had died? Your first reaction might be, that would be wonderful. But demographers disagree completely, because the human population grows geometrically. Today, there are about 8 billion people on Earth. If that extra 1 billion had lived and had children and grandchildren, today's population could easily be 12 to 15 billion. And that's where the real problem begins. The world is already struggling to feed 8 billion. Climate crisis, water shortages, food scarcity, ecological collapse, we're already at the breaking point. What would happen with 15 billion people? The answer is obvious: famine, drought, starvation. Look at the great leap forward in China. Between 1959 and 1961, there was no war, but 30 million people died of famine. How did they die? Slowly. Over days, weeks, months. First the children, then the elderly, then everyone else. So if there were no wars, people wouldn't die on the battlefield, true, but they would still die of hunger, disease, and lack of resources. And those deaths would be slower, more painful, and far crueler. War is terrifying, but it's sudden. Hunger is worse because it's slow. So here's where we've arrived. If there had been no war, the world wouldn't necessarily have been better. It might have been much worse. 15 billion people, exhausted resources, widespread famine, ecological collapse. Technology 50 years behind, no space exploration, no internet, no modern medicine. The pyramids never built, science developing slowly, the Renaissance delayed by 2 centuries, weak states, underdeveloped infrastructure, minimal economic renewal. But I need to make this very clear. This is not a defense of war. War is horrific. War is pain. War is loss. 1 billion dead, civilizations destroyed, libraries burned, families torn apart. None of this can ever be justified. But we have to be realistic. If there were no wars, there would still be other problems. Maybe less dramatic at first glance, but far more destructive in the long run. Slow starvation, resource depletion, uncontrolled population growth, stagnant technology. History has taught us one thing: there is no free progress. Everything has a cost, and sometimes that cost is unimaginably high. War is the most visible, the bloodiest form of that cost. But if there had been no wars, the cost wouldn't have disappeared. It would only have changed shape. Maybe the real solution isn't to erase war, but to channel the energy it creates into peaceful progress. Replace deadly competition with constructive competition. Replace destruction with creation. Replace conquest with discovery. Reduce the cost of progress, not eliminate it. Because history also teaches us this: there is no utopia. There was no perfect past, and there will be no perfect future, but a better world is possible. And that world is built by understanding the pain of the past, learning from it, and refusing to repeat the same mistakes. War was not inevitable. Every war was a choice. Different choices could have been made. But if there had been no wars, there would have been other problems, other pains, other losses. Which one is less terrible? We don't know, and maybe we never will. History doesn't give us simple answers. It only gives us complex questions. And maybe that's enough. Because as long as we keep asking, our understanding grows, and maybe, just maybe next time, we'll make better choices.